I think I was born a sprinter, and these days I think I can attribute it to heredity fairly confidently. The thought of running a long distance has absolutely no appeal. In fact, it is absolutely revolting to me. Now, I have many friends that are long distance runners, and I cannot understand as I watch them how that pained and exhausted expression that they wear on their face can even begin to come close to the exhilaration of flying for 100 meters. But I guess it works for them. It doesn't for me. I've taken my sprinter mentality into everything I do, and it has served me well over the years, able to burn through projects and situations quickly and move on to the next. But these days, what I've discovered is that COVID-19 is not a sprint. It's turned into a marathon. And as a sprinter, I am ill-equipped to deal with the distance. Early on, I was able to sprint my way through COVID, burning through project after project at church or in the new house or even just the moving. The neighbors were getting a little testy because I had managed to accomplish more in 3 months than they had in years on their property. But as time has gone on, even my projects have become marathons, as I've had to wait for supplies or change my designs because things were not available and wouldn't be available for many, many months. And so I've become bogged down and depressed, not able to accomplish much of anything. As I've begun to recognize that, I started to look to that great cloud of witnesses of distance runners that I know to see what it was that enabled them to endure and to persevere. And to a person, it is their discipline. Their discipline in training, their discipline in running, their discipline in diet. Every aspect of their life is disciplined with the idea of running those distances. And so I began to look at my own disciplines and discovered a lot. While I have been fairly disciplined in my workouts, I now have been able to discern that they are not only appropriate and necessary for my physical well-being, but they have a tremendous amount of impact on my psyche. In fact, I can usually tell if I have not been diligent in my routine because depression sneaks in very quickly. And so I've become much, much more disciplined in that time of exercise. Every morning I spend a couple hours in prayer, in spiritual reading, in scripture reading, and in meditation. And I've done this throughout my ministry, more successfully at some times than others. But my motivation has been that this is what a pastor should do. And what I've discovered in these past few months is this is what I have to do if I am to maintain any semblance of spiritual health. I've also begun to approach my work differently. Instead of looking at projects as sprints, I've begun to look at them as marathons. I went out and I bought a timer and I set it for the beginning of each project for about 45 minutes to an hour, and I work on it with everything I have. I sprint. But at the end of that time, I stop. The object is not to finish, but to give quality time to each aspect of the project. And then I move on to something else and come back to it later that day or perhaps later that week. I've discovered the importance of Sabbath, those momentary periods of rest during the day, and have worked hard to build them into my schedule, as well as to block off some serious Sabbath time during the week where no work is done. I have renewed my love for leisure reading. And hopefully in the days ahead, I will return to my studio to some very neglected carvings and paintings. For that creative piece is also very important to our emotional and spiritual well-being. And finally, one of the things I've rediscovered during this time is a practice that I learned when I was doing my spiritual direction education. And that is Ignatius's Examen, which in simple form is simply taking time either at the end or the beginning of the day and to review the last 24 hours. With the expressed look at where was God present in those days, in those hours, and even where was God absent and why. It puts the day in perspective, and it puts it in context with God. While any counselor or psychologist will probably tell you all of these things are good and necessary practices to be about, they are for us as spiritual people, the lifeblood. And people like St. Paul and other New Testament writers have been telling us that for centuries. Perhaps COVID just makes it a little more intense and a lot more important. So I invite you to join me in the marathon. If you're a sprinter, good luck. It's a lot of work. If you're a long distance runner, be a good witness for the rest of us. Show us the way. And together, surrounded by that great cloud of witnesses, let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us. How clear is our vocation, Lord, when once we heed your call, to live according to your word, and daily learn, refreshed, restored, that you are Lord of all, and will not let us fall. But if forgetful we should find, your yoke is hard to bear. If worldly pleasures fray the mind, and love itself cannot unwind its tangled skein of care, our inward life repair. We marvel how your saints become in hindrances more sure, whose joyful virtues put to shame the casual way we wear your name, and by our faults obscure your power to cleanse and cure.
in what you give us, Lord, to do together or alone. In old routines or ventures new, may we not cease to look to you, the cross you hung upon.